reading from Luke, chapters 18, 9 through 14. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted.
Have you ever had a secret, a regret, a betrayal, or a personal failure that you longed to get off your chest, to let go of, to finally be done with, only you were too afraid of what others might think to reveal it publicly or to name it aloud? In 2004, a man named Frank Warren had this crazy idea. He printed 3,000 self-addressed postcards, blank on one side with simple instructions on the other side, to anonymously write down one secret that had never been told to anyone before. He then handed out the blank postcards randomly on the streets of Washington, D.C., not knowing what to expect. But the idea spread virally. People began to buy or even make their own postcards, and soon Warren was receiving postcards from all over the world: Texas, Vancouver, New Zealand, Iraq, hundreds of thousands of anonymous postcards sharing personal secrets. Once a week, Warren uploaded the postcards to a website called postsecret.com for others to read. That website became the most visited ad-free blog in the world. Some of the secrets written on those postcards are heartbreaking, others hysterical. All are deeply human. My sister lives 2 blocks away, writes one. We haven't spoken in 5 years. I'm a nurse and I don't wash my hands enough. I'm a leader in recovery, but relapsed 3 years ago and never changed my clean date. I judge people who still read Harry Potter. Everyone who knew me before 9/11 believes I am dead. I'm a teacher, and working with parents sometimes makes me want to pull my hair out. And this from a Starbucks barista. I give decaf to customers who are rude to me. Warren says he started the project because he was struggling with his own secrets, and it was only through crowdsourcing and the kindness of strangers that he could uncover these secrets that were haunting him. We're all looking to offload our secrets and regrets, our betrayals and failures. They can become too heavy to carry, and they persist as a source of our pain. There's an adage that says, if we do not transform our pain, we will transmit our pain. And we know the truth of that not only at a deeply personal level, but we see it play out daily in the public domain. Wherever there is violence of thought, word, or action perpetrated against ourselves or against others, there's always some unseen, unnamed, unhealed pain that has become too heavy to carry. We struggle to manage it. From addiction, self-harm, and self-sabotaging behaviors to shaming and bullying and retribution, our untransformed pain always seems to get the best of us, often adding more pain to the world. That pain longs to be healed, and one way we can find healing is through spirituality or religion, although a growing number of people today are repulsed by the word religion. Nevertheless, the word religion It comes from the Latin religare. It's from that root word ligare that we get our English word ligament. Religion literally means to re-ligament, to connect, to bind together. Religion is supposed to be this agent of healing, a sacred pathway for transforming our pain. But if our religion or spiritual practices do not help us face and transform our pain, we are probably not practicing healthy forms of religion or spirituality. A generative religion, a healthy spirituality, will always require us to be honest about our secrets, our failings and pain, and to acknowledge the ways our untransformed pain causes pain for others. In Alcoholics Anonymous, people will introduce themselves to the group as an alcoholic. They begin by naming this truth about themselves. And as they move through recovery, they eventually arrive at step 5, which requires them to admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 12-step groups remind us that transformation can only happen when we are honest about the pain we carry and remorseful about the pain we have caused. For Christians, one of the core spiritual practices for healing our pain and interrupting that cycle of transmission is a form of prayer called confession. A prayer of confession is a simple prayer in which we name ourselves before God, just as we truly are, and then own up to the harm we have done, and then ask God to forgive and renew us. It doesn't have to be complicated or wordy or even remotely religious. We simply name whatever it is we've done or left undone that has caused harm or perpetuated pain, and we ask for grace and release and restoration, for lashing out in anger at another, for encountering a person in need and failing to act compassionately, for speaking ill of another in their absence, for road rage, pride, perfectionism, jealousy, betrayal, taking advantage of others. We name ourselves before God as we truly are and own up to the harm that we've done and ask for forgiveness. Confessing our mistakes and failures can sound woeful and feel intimidating, but this is where religion often gets in the way of re-ligamenting or connecting us to God. Maybe we've always assumed that religion was this exercise in achieving moral purity or earning God's approval. Or maybe we've always assumed that God's love is conditional, that only good, righteous rule followers are worthy of divine acceptance. Or maybe we've always assumed that when we mess up or fall short, the God who awaits us is a cosmic judge or grand inquisitor, whose love can only be regained by our paying some heavy price for our transgressions. But if religion is really about being re-ligamented to God and to others, then shame and duress, shunning, disappointment, judgment, condemnation, these are all the false gods of a dying religion. If we fear confession or vulnerability, humility or apology, it's a clear sign that we are worshiping the wrong God. The writer Mirabai Starr says, "Once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. When we meet the God of love, we can end the silence and shame of our failures. Our confession is met by divine forgiveness, and we become unbound from our mistakes. And we can finally stop worrying about measuring up to some false God's expectations, and we can experience the relief that comes from revealing the secrets and regrets that burden us." If you've ever been to the Holy Land, chances are you have visited the Dead Sea. Maybe you've even gone swimming in it. The Dead Sea is the lowest land depression in the world. It's about 400 meters below sea level. It's part of the Great Rift Valley, which extends all the way down into Africa. The Dead Sea is known in Hebrew as Yam HaMelach, as the sea of salt. It's about 30% salt, nearly 8 times the salt content of the ocean. That's too salty to sustain life. In fact, fish that are washed down the Jordan River into the Dead Sea will immediately die. Scientists have discovered 11 species of bacteria that somehow manage to survive in that environment. But for all practical purposes, the Dead Sea is true to its name. Why is it dead? Because the Dead Sea has no outlets. Water flows in from the Jordan, but there's no way for that water to get out. It evaporates, and it leaves behind the sediment and elements and detritus that make life unsustainable. The secrets we keep buried, the regrets that never find a way out, will eventually make our lives unsustainable. But here's the more urgent truth for us. You would never know simply by looking at the Dead Sea that it's actually dead. It's such a beautiful body of water that you'd never know that what's below the surface is toxic and cannot sustain life. It conceals its truth so naturally. It disguises its impurity so attractively. It's a metaphor, perhaps, for how easy it is to deceive ourselves or even others about what's really going on beneath the surface of our lives, and how hard it is to be honest about ourselves, to see ourselves truthfully, apart from all the ways we try to justify our innocence or moral purity. We forget that we all have work to do, and that the work is never finished. Which is why Jesus tells this story about 2 men who go into the temple to pray. One of them is a very religious man. Maybe you know or have seen people like him. On the outside, he's so well put together, so tight with God spiritually that when he walks into church, you can hear a squeak as he passes by. He's a walking Bible, able to quote scripture on demand in both Hebrew and Greek. He tithes his income, prays 3 times a day, stocks the shelves at the food bank on Wednesdays, and serves a hot meal at the shelter on Saturdays. He even traded in his Volvo diesel for a Toyota Prius just to do his part environmentally. And if you looked up the word Christian in the dictionary, you'd find this man's picture. He walks the talk. He's very confident about his faith. He works very hard at it, and he represents well. He is the real deal, especially when you compare him to this sketchy character who walks into church right behind him, a shifty-looking interloper who actually just took up 2 whole parking spaces in the church parking lot with his oversized gas-guzzling Hummer. He runs a shady payday loan operation downtown, the kind that preys on the desperate and fleeces the poor. Based on his appearance right here in church this day, with his bloodshot eyes and his disheveled hair, he probably partied pretty hard the night before. This man has never stepped foot in a church even once, and doesn't really even know why he's sitting in one now. Except there's this thing. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but it's something. It's real. It's weighing heavily on his conscience, which is rather shocking to him because he didn't even know he had a conscience until he woke up this morning and heard it speaking to him, shouting at him, compelling him to go to, of all places, a church. And whatever it is, it's stirring in him in that hidden part of his core, that part that he's heard some people call the soul. It's trying to tell him that something's not right with him. It's stirring up all these unexpected, messy questions like, what have you done? What are you doing with your life? How can you keep living like this, pretending that it's all okay? How can you run from the truth? It's time to come clean. This is not sustainable. And so he comes to church because he knows that he simply cannot carry any of it any longer. And in the story that Jesus tells, he happens to sit right next to that very religious man, Mr. Real Deal, who immediately stiffens up and tilts slightly in the other direction as though he might catch something contagious from this shadowy stranger. And there couldn't be a greater contrast of characters, a saint and a sinner, the worthy and the unworthy, the blessed and the disgraceful, sitting right next to each other in church. In the silence, Mr. Real Deal begins to pray. God, I thank you that I'm not like this schmuck sitting next to me. And as if God didn't already know this, he adds, I fast twice a week, I tithe my income, I serve the poor. He's so proud. Meanwhile, this scoundrel sitting next to him can scarcely find the words to speak to this holy mystery in whose presence he now trembles. Holding his face in his hands, unable even to look up, he says, God, have mercy on me. Forgive me. Whenever Jesus tells a parable, we often wonder, which character in the story am I? We want to identify with someone. Who am I supposed to be in this story? But in this particular story, the contrast between the two characters, it's so glaring that if we were really honest about it, we're likely neither. At least not either one entirely. What if Jesus, instead, had meant the story to be heard another way? What if Jesus had meant to imply that there were not two people who entered the church to pray that day, but one? One person who is both characters at the same time. One person who works really hard at being faithful to God and doing good in the world, and yet who struggles mightily to keep his regrets and mistakes locked in secrecy. What if two people went into church to pray that day and they happened to be the same person? One person divided as we all are, divided between wanting to be and do the good and right thing, but sometimes failing miserably. One person who today has it all together and the next is falling apart at the seams. One person who can be as charitable as Mother Teresa and as heartless as Ted Kaczynski on any given day. And because God meets both with love and grace and acceptance without condemnation, they're allowed to fire all other gods in favor of this one God who says, tell me all your secrets, and I will exchange them for your life. Pastor and author Bruce Modal wrote about a man who would wander into his church every Sunday, but would always slip out during the last hymn. And one Sunday he stayed and he introduced himself. His name was Don, just Don. And months earlier, Don shared that he had left his wife of more than 20 years. He had two daughters, one in high school, the other just finishing college. Don left them too. But then his older daughter was planning her wedding, and she called him and asked if he would walk her down the aisle. And she wanted him to be at the wedding. She wanted him in her life. And that call brought Don back to church, not the church he belonged to, because given what he'd done, he didn't think he could walk back into that church. He began to think about the kind of man he'd hoped to be. And his daughter's call brought him back in conversation with his wife. In one of those conversations, his wife said to him, "Come home. Don, just come home." His daughter's kindness, his wife's invitation affected him deeply, forcing him to look at the kind of man he'd become. His regret and remorse brought him to Modal's church, and he asked Modal, "What shall I do now?" Modal led him to the baptismal font and said, "Are you prepared to make your confession?" And Don said he was. And together they read Psalm 51. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your loving kindness. In your great compassion, blot out my offenses, wash me, cleanse me from my sin." Modal laid hands on Don and said, "God is merciful and blesses you. Your sins are forgiven." They stood looking at each other, puzzled. Don asked, "Well, what should I do now?" And Modal said, "Go home. Your shame has turned to rejoicing." And Modal writes, Don went home. We all have our secrets and we all carry our regrets. We all live these divided lives, striving to be our best selves while struggling with our worst. The question is not whether we have confessions to make, but whether we will find the courage to make them. Here's what I know. On the other side of confession is not condemnation. On the other side of confession is freedom. On the other side of confession is life, sustainable, breathable, beautiful life. Today's takeaways: if we do not transform our pain, we will transmit our pain. Once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. On the other side of confession is not condemnation, but freedom and life.